This is the nature of things. Our planet is lit up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're addicted to light. We just can't get enough of it. But like anything else that's addictive, could too much be a bad thing?
So I started to wonder, well, gee, could this light during the night be disrupting hormones that would increase their risk of cancer?
The increased risk of diabetes, of cardiovascular disease and obesity may be due to increased exposure to light at night. And this is a very unnatural thing for us to be exposed to.
My personal circadian rhythms are all over the place.
Shift workers have a higher risk of developing certain cancers, particularly breast cancer.
Could one of our greatest inventions be causing us harm? Do we really have to turn the lights out? We're drawn to light like moths. Living in the glow of electric light extends our days, brightens winter nights, and makes us feel safer. Now photos of the Earth at night, taken from outer space, show there is almost no populated place left that's ever in total darkness. Could it be making us sick? Light. It's a force that nourishes our biological, mental, and spiritual needs. We're almost magnetically drawn to light, no matter what the source. For most of our history, it was only available in the daytime. But ever since it was introduced in the late 1800s, electric lighting has been an indicator of civilized progress. It has enabled us to do things we never could have done before, extending our working time and our playtime. Now, light is just about everywhere, all of the time. No technology has changed us more than the electric light. But just as with most other environmental changes, there are consequences. Dr. Stephen Lockley is a neuroscientist specializing in sleep and chronobiology.
About 130 years or so ago, we started really an experiment on the human race by introducing light at night into our environment. And this is a very unnatural thing for us to be exposed to. We would never have been exposed to light the intensities that we can now produce.
What harm could there be in a bit of light? The fact is, light does more than simply allow us to see the world around us. It also plays a role in the timing of our biological clock, also known as our circadian system. Dr. George Brainerd is the director of light research at Thomas Jefferson University.
By far, the most potent input to the circadian system is that of light and darkness. The circadian system is literally dominated by light and darkness. And in turn, those signals are quite important to the underlying normal, healthy function of this system and of the whole body.
Our circadian system is an internal biological clock that helps our bodies adapt to the cycle of day and night as the Earth rotates every 24 hours. In the morning, as the sun rises, so does our blood pressure and temperature. Our body is fully alert by mid-morning. Our metabolism speeds up, and by midday, we get hungry. We're at our mental and physical peak in the late afternoon. And as the evening approaches, we are cued for more changes. As the sun goes down, so does our metabolism. We get sleepy. Our body repairs itself. We enter our deepest sleep. Our body temperature drops, and with the rising of the sun, we repeat the cycle again. As fundamental as these unconscious rhythms are, it's only in the past few decades that we have been learning how they work.
There was a long debate which was resolved in the early 1970s when the site of the body clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, was discovered, and researchers could prove once and for all that there was an internal body clock situated in the mammalian brain.
The clock is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. It's hardwired to the eyes, and when it gets dark, the SCN cues the pineal gland to produce the hormone melatonin, which courses through the body, coordinating rhythms throughout the nervous system, which in turn feeds back timing signals to the SCN. This rhythm continues until daylight, at which point melatonin shuts down and daytime body functions take over. This system runs like a self-winding watch, but we would be quickly out of sync with the planet without a daily reset from the SCN. The job of the SCN has been compared to that of a symphony conductor, a timekeeper dictating rhythms to the entire orchestra.
Please, this evening our special guest, Dr. David Blass on the trumpet. Everybody give him a great hand.
But this scientist, come trumpet player, here's a more easygoing musical analogy.
I think of the whole circadian system as sort of a jazz group.
I'm ready.
You have the suprachiasmatic nucleus, for example, I think of as the bass player in the jazz group. The pineal gland making melatonin as the drummer. And they're communicating with one another. They're setting the pulse, the beat, if you will. The jazz drummer and bass player conveys that beat to the other musicians in the group. And so all the other musicians in the jazz group are keeping their own internal sense of time, but they're getting that signal from the rhythm section as well, and they're coordinating the two. So under conditions where the signal is robust and it's there, you've got this rhythm of life that is keeping the body healthful and keeping a disease process under control. When you disrupt that rhythm and that harmony with light at night, for example, you screw up that rhythm section, and then these peripheral tissues and cells are not getting that coordinating beat. And so they're going off on their own, and now, unlike the jazz group where it sounds like crap, it feels like crap. But when it's right, you've got great music.
Our musical resonance with the natural world evolved over millions of years of predictable light and dark cycles. But now that most of us live and work indoors, our days are no longer sun-filled. And we can't count on darkness at the end of the day to cue our internal rhythm. What is this change doing to our health? Richard Stevens has been trying to find answers for more than 25 years. His search began not in sleep study, but in the study of breast cancer, the #1 cancer killer for women worldwide. It had a spread pattern that puzzled scientists. The incidence and mortality rates were high in Europe and North America, but very low in Asia and Africa.
The first thought was, well, it's race. There's racial differences, genetic differences, but we learned in the 1950s and 60s that that was not the case. The next thought was diet. There are such tremendous differences in the diet between Asia and the United States and Northern Europe. But then by the 1980s, the very good long-term dietary studies started hitting. What adult women eat has almost no bearing on their risk of breast cancer at all. And this was very disappointing to the cancer research community. So in the mid-1980s, I wondered, well, what the heck else changes with industrialization?
That's when the light bulb switched on.
I was in my apartment and I realized that I could read a newspaper by the light shining in from the street light. And that's when I thought, gosh, that's new in the modern world. Could that be affecting our physiology?
The international incidence of breast cancer lines up dramatically with the global spread of electric light at night.
One of the things that is known about breast cancer is that it is often a hormone-dependent cancer. So I started to wonder, well, gee, could this light during the night and this lack of sun during the day, Could that be disrupting hormones in women in the modern world that would increase their risk of breast cancer?
Stevens was the first to propose that the high incidence of breast cancer in industrial countries might be caused by light at night. It was a radical idea, one that was going to be difficult to prove.
When we are trying to find hazards to human health, we're really in a tough spot because we cannot do randomized trials for hazards. We can't randomize some women to get a lot of light at night and some to not. We need some kind of a model. We need a real animal model that demonstrates whether or not light can affect the growth of breast cancer.
As Stevens pursued his cancer theory, a scientist at Ohio State University was discovering other new hazards, quite by accident. Dr. Randy Nelson had been testing how light at night would impact reproduction in small mammals by adjusting their light and dark cycles.
And then, accidentally, however, we stumbled onto a phenomenon in our laboratory where we moved into this nice state-of-the-art laboratory building with this fancy programmable central computer-generated light switch, and it failed, and the lights were left on all night. And what happened within 4 weeks were that the mice who were in this room had gained about 20% more body mass than the animals that were on the normal light-dark cycles.
They first suspected the cause was stress from the bright lights, because these were nocturnal animals. But repeating the experiment with low levels of light had the same effect: fat mice.
These animals were gaining this body mass without changing the caloric intake and without changing their exercise.
What did change was when they ate. They were getting the same calories every day, but taking them in at odd times.
As you know, the advent of electrical lighting has only been around for about 130 years. That's allowed people to eat later and later and later, and probably not the best time to be eating, because there's a syndrome called night eating syndrome where people tend to eat in the middle of the night. They wake up and they eat, and these folks tend to gain a significant amount of body mass. It looks like there's certain of the clock genes get dysregulated, and it affects metabolism.
Metabolic disruption isn't the only problem. Light at night can also affect cardiac survival rates. Animals in the lab had a post-heart attack survival rate of almost 100% if they were kept in the dark at night.
But what's interesting is if they're exposed initially to 3 nights of dim light, which is about equivalent to going into cardiac intensive care after a cardiac arrest or a stroke, we found that the survival rates were reduced to somewhere between 30 and 40%. So survival was impaired, and we actually showed that this happened after just a single night of dim light at night. We were obviously very surprised by this.
Light at night may also be the culprit in the rise of some forms of depression. Tracy Bedrosian is one of Dr. Nelson's graduate students.
I would consider myself a circadian biologist. I'm not studying sleep per se, but I am studying how disruption of the body's natural timekeeping mechanism can contribute to changes in mood and emotion. There's a couple different commonly experienced levels of light at night exposure. For the average person, it might be a low level of light, for example, leaving your TV or computer screen on in your bedroom at night. And then on the flip side, there's also people like shift workers, nurses, and flight attendants who are exposed to very high levels of light at night. We wanted to look at the effects of what the average person might experience, so low levels of light over the chronic term. So we developed a setup where we exposed animals to very dim light at night, about 5 lux. You can think of it as having a large TV screen on in your dark bedroom. And we exposed them to this level of light every night throughout the entire night for 4 weeks.
After 4 weeks of chronic low light exposure, the animals were examined to see if there were any effects, specifically depression.
Of course, it's hard to ask a rodent if they feel depressed, but you can approximate certain symptoms with a couple different tests. So, for example, if we give them the choice of drinking tap water versus a sugar solution, they'll normally prefer to drink more of the sugar water. In our animals that were exposed to light at night, however, they had about 50-50 preference for sugar versus normal water, which means they no longer enjoy things they would have normally.
The animals' brains also showed increasing signs of tumor necrosis factor, an inflammatory response associated with depression.
I was surprised to see that such a low level of light could provoke such profound effects.
Another surprise came when the animals were returned to a standard light and dark cycle.
I was surprised by the rapidity that it fixed things. So in 2 weeks, she could reverse most of the symptoms. I thought that was impressive. In some cases, within a week, we saw changes. It hasn't escaped our notice that you see a large increase in obesity and a large increase in depression over the past 100 years. And it coincides with the electrification and the illumination at night in our homes and around our cities. And as underdeveloped countries get electrification in their homes, you see these two disorders, obesity, metabolic disorder, and depression rates increase in a very close association. If we look at our neighbors here around Central Ohio, the Amish, who do not use electricity, you see extremely low levels of depression, and you see virtually no obesity. Now, you might attribute that to the hard work they engage in, but if you look at the caloric intake, these folks, high saturated caloric intake, you see very little heart disease. You see virtually no metabolic disorder in these individuals. And so it's another hint that maybe the light at night and the circadian dysregulation may contribute to these disorders in people.
While some populations, like the Amish, have managed to dodge many modern diseases by avoiding light at night, the rest of us may be standing directly in the line of fire.
When these individuals are exposed to light at night, and presumably that's enough to screw up their melatonin, they're losing, we think, an important protective mechanism at night.
Light might be one of the major environmental risk factors that can alter breast cancer rates in women.
Scientists are now learning more about the darker side of light. Since the introduction of electric light 130 years ago, there has been an increase in diseases like obesity, depression, and breast cancer. It's only recently that we've noticed and tried to find out why and what can be done about it. Dr. David Blask had been looking at night light exposure and the effects of melatonin on human breast cancer cells. His lab in Cooperstown had 2 groups of rats implanted with human cancer cells. One group was in a natural 12 hours light, 12 hours dark cycle and exhibited natural melatonin production during the dark hours. The other group was exposed to constant bright light for 24 hours a day.
And sure enough, within days of exposure of these animals that had these tumors implanted, we saw the tumors appearing in the constant light animals that we could actually begin to measure. Whereas in the control animals that had an intact melatonin signal, there were no tumors to be found. So this really confirmed that the nighttime physiological concentration of melatonin, at least in this animal model, is an important circadian anti-cancer molecule.
As convincing as the results were, there was still a problem that frustrated Blask: real clinical proof. Because ultimately, rats are not small humans.
You can't take individuals and subject them to light at night for many years and see if they develop breast cancer. You can't do it technically, you can't do it ethically. It's impossible. So how could we do something that would bridge the epidemiological work showing that shift workers had increased risk of breast cancer with our laboratory work?
Then Blask had an idea. Why not infuse the tumors on the rats with blood from humans who had been exposed to light at night? That's where Thomas Jefferson University's Light Research Program came in.
Dr. Blask contacted me and proposed that we try to do a hybrid study, a study that involved humans and animals. And it was a brilliant idea. We recruited healthy, young, premenopausal females to participate in this study, and they would have 3 separate blood samples collected from them. They would come in the middle of the day, and they would have their first blood sample collected. They then would go about their day, they would leave the laboratory, but they would come back to us in the evening. At that time, We would put them in a blindfold and they would sit from midnight until 2 o'clock in the morning. While they were still blindfolded and experiencing darkness, a blood sample would be taken from their forearm. We would then remove the blindfold and expose them to very bright white fluorescent light for 90 minutes.
Thank you.
At the end of that exposure period, another blood sample would be collected. Those blood samples were then immediately shipped down the following day to Dr. Blask's laboratory.
Blask's lab specialist, Bob Docci, was standing by with rats surgically implanted with human breast tumors. Each blood sample from Brainerd's lab was pumped or perfused through identically sized tumors. This was a blind study, which means they didn't know which tumor was getting which blood sample. But within a short period of time, it became obvious because some tumors were growing and others were not.
So Bob analyzed the data, and we could see a clear pattern. The tumors that had received the daytime blood were very active metabolically and proliferating, but the tumors that were perfused with the blood collected at night, where melatonin was high, the growth rate of these cells was shut down by about 85%. It was dramatic. And then when we looked at the tumors that had been perfused with the blood taken at night, but after light treatment, where melatonin levels were suppressed again, metabolic activity shot right back up to where it was during the daytime. So this was as much of a eureka moment as you could get in science. This was just incredible. Our cells are susceptible to developing into cancer cells at any time. So melatonin, we think, at night may be one of those protective mechanisms that keeps those cells, if they're there, at bay. And so in shift workers, as one population that is exposed to an environmental insult, artificial light at night, they have a higher risk of developing certain cancers, particularly breast cancer. So when these individuals are working the night shift and are exposed to light at night, that's enough to screw up their melatonin. They're losing, we think, an important protective mechanism at night.
Just how does this important protective mechanism, melatonin, work? Answers are being found here at the Intensive Physiological Monitoring Unit at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston.
We do a range of different measures to try and work out how light's affecting the brain.
Hey Richard, can you please straighten your IV arm for a little bit? Thank you.
We take blood samples to look at levels of melatonin in the blood to see how much melatonin is suppressed. We also look at the rhythm of melatonin to try and work out how much the body clock has been shifted.
Melatonin. It fights cancer, keeps us healthy, and it's a hormone that only comes out in the dark.
Ian, here's your response box for your PBT test. Please remember to press the right button only.
But studies here are showing that when melatonin is suppressed by light, not all colors of light have the same effect.
And we've found that, for example, blue light or shorter wavelength visible light is more effective at shifting the timing of the biological clock. It's more effective at suppressing melatonin, and it's more effective at alerting the brain as compared to the same number of photons of a green light or a red light.
There is an elegant evolutionary logic to human color sensitivity. While the sun contains all colors of the spectrum, some are more prominent at certain times of the day. Red is the color of the setting sun just before dark. It's also the color of fire, a nighttime source of warmth and illumination for 1.5 million years. And red happens to have little effect on melatonin production. And then there's blue, nature's wake-up alarm.
When you look at the clear sky on a morning, that blue up there, it's a beautiful, pure kind of blue. That's the most effective at suppressing melatonin, photon for photon. But it's a matter of timing. With light, we want bright blue light in the morning, and we want dark at night. So the blue light is actually good in the morning and would be not good, I don't want to say bad, but not good in the middle of the night.
Not good for those people who are shift workers. For them, it's 10 a.m. all night long.
I've messed up my circadian rhythms by trying to be a night worker and function during the day at the same time. And I do feel it.
21% of the workforce is doing shift work, and they have compression of their sleep cycle, and they have disruption of the circadian system. So it's a serious problem.
The lights are on all night. So how do we keep shift workers healthy? Humans evolved to be active in the daytime and to rest at nighttime. But a shift worker must constantly fight that impulse.
0 in Windsor, Essex, with a mainly sunny day coming up and milder, a high near 10 degrees. I'm Rob Sherville, AM 800 News. I usually arrive about 2 o'clock in the morning. I write for about 3 hours in time for the first newscast at 5 o'clock. Our top story this hour, Budget Day in Ontario. Windsor, Tecumseh, and
Friday and Saturday, I work from 10 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the morning. But I don't sleep, no. There's no sleep in it.
From 10 o'clock at night till 8 a.m. in the morning.
I usually work Saturday nights late, 4 to 4, and Friday nights 6 to 3.
I've been doing permanent nights probably about 13 years, I guess. My sleep patterns are horrible.
Majority of the time, it's very little sleep that you're going on working night shift.
I never get an 8 hours straight sleep, and I haven't for about 5 years, and I'm tired.
Just about any product or service we require is now available 24 hours a day. And the 20% of our population who work night shifts are unwitting subjects in an ongoing circadian rhythm disruption experiment. This experiment begins at 8 p.m. when the shift starts.
So if we completed Lima 13, are we on Lima 13?
If the workers get off at 6 a.m., they will have been exposed to light all night and will have produced almost no melatonin. On the trip home, morning light will give a strong signal to keep melatonin switched off. It will also cue standard early morning body clock functions, like an increase in blood pressure and metabolism. This will further delay sleep. Even if they're in bed by 8 a.m., that sunshine cue will delay melatonin production for 90 minutes to 2 hours, longer if the room isn't completely dark. If they manage to sleep for 6 or 7 hours, they have still shortchanged their systems of a healthy dose of melatonin. What are the health consequences? There was very little science on this until Richard Stevens began his research on breast cancer and circadian disruption.
I published a paper making this theory that light at night might increase risk of breast cancer. So we started trying to make predictions based on that. The first one is kind of obvious, is that shift working women would be at higher risk.
The best place to test his theory was the Nurses' Health Study, a decades-long investigation involving over 238,000 nurse participants, monitoring women's diet, physical activity, and other lifestyle factors, like shift work. Phase 2 of the study revealed that nurses with at least 20 years of night shift work showed a 79% increase in the risk of breast cancer, compared with those who had done no shift work at all. This mounting evidence was enough for the International Agency for Research on Cancer to take a closer look. They enlisted Richard Stevens and David Blask and an international team to make an official decision about light and night shift work.
We put it all together and came to the conclusion that based on existing evidence, shift work that involves circadian disruption is a probable human carcinogen.
Shift work has now been put in the same risk category as anabolic steroids, ultraviolet radiation, and diesel engine exhaust. And now, health insurance companies in Denmark are paying compensation to women who have developed breast cancer following years of shift work. And breast cancer is just the beginning.
A consequence of shift work is risk of cardiovascular disease is more than double that of a day worker. And there are many other things that have been identified, such as gastrointestinal distress, emotional disturbances, decrements in performance and cognitive ability, and the like.
Performance problems caused by circadian disruption have serious consequences. Many of the most notorious industrial accidents in recent history, 3 Mile Island, Bhopal, Chernobyl, the Exxon Valdez, all were the result of human error committed in the early morning hours. The deadliest time to be on the highway is between midnight and 6 a.m., and night shift workers are about 6 times more likely to have a crash due to fatigue.
The worst time at night is around 5 and 6 in the morning. That's the lowest point of our body temperature, and this is also the lowest point of our vigilance. Alertness level is very low at that time.
Professor Marc Hébert is president of the Society for Light Treatment and Biological Rhythms. He has been working with truckers driving rigs like this one, about to cross the country with a shipment of perishable goods. 2 drivers will spell one another off and keep the wheels spinning. But that still means driving during those dangerous early morning hours. So Hébert has found a way for the drivers to shift their circadian rhythm using a special light that won't interfere with night vision, one that is blue.
It will trick the biological clock, it's daytime as opposed to nighttime, but also it's been shown by other researchers that it will also increase vigilance. The heartbeat will increase, the body temperature, central body temperature will go up as well.
And you can adjust the intensity with the arrow. It's going down and you can increase the power.
It's not practical to completely shift a worker's circadian rhythms in opposition to the rest of the world. And according to Dr. Hébert, it's unnecessary.
You don't really need to shift them by 8 hours to be a very perfect night worker because they revert to the day shift with their family during time off or vacation or whatever. So we really just trying to get a partial phase shift, about 2 hours, that's it.
This partial phase shift is achieved by a strategically timed nighttime dose of blue light, tricking the body clock into thinking it's 10 a.m. And then, another trick.
You're gonna wear, this is the opposite effect. You're gonna have the light at night, and then when the sun comes up, sunrise, you're gonna wear glasses. I have one pair for you. Just make sure that they're tight, no lights.
As the sun rises, glasses that filter out the natural blue in the morning light will help trick the body clock into thinking it's evening, so the drivers will be able to naturally produce melatonin and get some sleep before the next shift begins. It's not the only solution being tested for night workers. Dr. Robert Casper at the Samuel Lunenfeld Research Institute at Mount Sinai.
We're coming at it from a different point of view. Rather than trying to adjust the abnormal circadian rhythm, we're actually trying to prevent the circadian rhythm from being shifted in the first place.
Casper was invited to conduct studies at one of the world's largest nuclear plants, Bruce Power, a 24/7 operation with over 4,000 employees, many on night shifts.
Only during the 3 weeks is the only time when you would wear the glasses for the purpose of the study.
They wore glasses that filtered out the same blue light the truckers turned on to stay alert at night, the color that suppresses melatonin.
By blocking out that bandwidth of light, we prevented the light from shifting the circadian rhythm or the 24-hour clock. So what we found was that the subjects felt more alert at night, they made fewer errors and mistakes, their reaction times were better, and surprisingly they actually slept much better the next night after their nights on call, because we think that their circadian rhythm wasn't shifted so that they were still on regular time, so when on their day off they were able to sleep well at night.
In a facility like this, where safety is of main importance, we're asking our people to be at the top of the game, and we've heard some positive results on better sleep quality, better alertness. Shift workers have difficulty sleeping when they need to rebuild themselves between shifts, and that has improved to some level by wearing the glasses.
Thank you very much. No contamination. Please?
These particular glasses do cast the world in a yellow tint because they stop all colors below 480 nanometers. Casper has found a way to fix this with filtering out or notching only a narrow part of the blue spectrum. And now he's working on the next logical step, a smarter light bulb.
Our prototype light bulbs look pretty white. They look like a soft white light bulb. So then one of the future applications then would be to have light bulbs at home at night, for example, and they would be the soft white light, but it would not contain 470 to 480 nanometers. So even though you're turning on your lights in the house, if they're all notched, it would be the same as being in the dark. So you'd have that extra 3 or 4 hours of melatonin secretion, just like it would have been 100 years ago before electric lights.
Going back to the world before electric lighting might seem impossible up here, some 390 kilometers above the Earth, as the International Space Station orbits every 92 minutes. This is the ultimate shift work job. MIT and Brigham and Women's Hospital are now testing specialized lighting systems to mimic the natural cycles of light on Earth. This is to help reset the circadian clock and improve alertness in astronauts who experience circadian disruption or poor sleep in space.
Very few of us currently go into outer space, so why invest all this time and effort in it? The answer is obvious. The problems that sleep and circadian disruption that astronauts experience in spaceflight are very similar to the problems that people in shift work populations experience here in the United States and most of the first world countries of the world. If we can get it right for the astronauts, that technology can be applied right here on Earth to the benefit of tens of thousands of workers.
When it comes to lighting, it may be safer right now to be in outer space than in the average North American home.
We found that even light as low as about 90 lux of light, which can easily be obtained from a bedside lamp or a computer screen, was able to suppress melatonin for about an hour and a half.
Most modern households have TV screens, computer systems, and game systems that have strong emission of blue light. So it's concerning to be using blue-enriched lights prior to bedtime. That's actually going to frustrate the body's capacity to go to sleep.
Light at night makes us feel safe, but is it putting us at risk? The introduction of the electric light bulb was revolutionary and had a great impact on our environment. And there are more changes to come. Will they be beneficial or harmful? It depends on our choices. 90% of the energy used by incandescent lighting is wasted as heat, so the search is on for efficient alternatives. CFLs, compact fluorescent lights, are efficient and economical and can easily replace incandescent bulbs in older light fixtures, but most cannot be dimmed. If they're broken, trace elements of toxic mercury are released. And CFLs tend to produce light that is cool and very rich in the blue spectrum, a type of light that's useful for waking the body at 10 in the morning, but can delay natural melatonin production in the evening. Here at Light Fair International, the world's largest commercial lighting conference, the new frontier is light-emitting diodes, or LEDs. Early LEDs also had a problematic blue cast, but that's changing. Designers have a unique challenge: create a new modern source with the look, feel, and functionality of the original 100-year-old Edison bulb.
People see immediately how much this is exactly like an incandescent bulb in the way it distributes light, in the full radial flux, in the color temperature, the dimmability when they try the dimming switches and they say, wow, that dims just like my incandescent A-lamp. And so we've had a tremendously positive reaction.
Very, very, very hard to determine the difference.
Right. Well, thank you. That's exactly what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice.
LED use is not yet widespread, and when the sun sets, we are exposed to bright light of all sorts everywhere we go. And homes today have light sources our parents could never have imagined.
Most modern households have TV screens that have strong blue emissions in them, computer systems, and game systems that also have strong emission of blue light. So it's concerning to be using blue-enriched lights prior to bedtime. That's actually going to frustrate the body's capacity to go to sleep.
We've recently published a study where we looked at room light levels, and we found that even light as low as about 90 lux of light, which can easily be obtained from a bedside lamp or a computer screen, was able to suppress melatonin for about an hour and a half. And so indoor room light levels are easily capable of affecting our circadian system and affecting our melatonin levels.
Light and darkness is such a potent regulator of the circadian system. Under ideal circumstances, one would get outdoors or have a workspace that has windows so they have access to daylight, and have dimmer light during the evening. Not necessarily dark in the evening, but dimmer than bright white fluorescent light.
We're not going to go back to life before electricity. I'm certainly not. The more we know about the wavelengths of light and the intensity of it, the better we will be able to sort of change our lighting to still do what we need to do, but be better for our circadian health. When your eyelids are closed in sleep, and if you have street light coming in, that may be enough to subtly disrupt your circadian system. If you get up to go to the facilities in the middle of the night, and if you do turn on those bright lights, we know for sure that will start suppressing melatonin immediately. So there are alternatives. Have a dim red light in the bathroom. I do. And I mean, it sounds a little goofy at first, but I do. And it's simple. It's enough light to stay safe, but it does not alert my system. It doesn't wake me up.
We all experience occasional wakefulness in the middle of the night. What to do when sleep won't come?
For a long time, we in the modern world have been told that normal sleep means sleeping straight through for 8 hours. We have also been told that if you wake up in the middle of the night, good sleep hygiene says, get out of the bedroom, go read a book, turn on the TV. That is all being changed dramatically. And in fact, the thing to do is to stay in bed in the dark. That period in the middle of the night when we're awake in the dark is a different kind of wakefulness. If we've stayed in the dark, our circadian system still says it is nighttime. If we turn on the lights, our circadian system is being given the message, hey, it's day, it's time to wake up. So if you stay in the dark, you can get back to sleep. If you turn on the lights, it's going to make it a lot tougher to get back to sleep.
The discovery that the human eye is responding to light and darkness and having a profound effect on our physiology, our behavior, and potentially our health is still relatively new. The beginnings of that was in the 1980s. It has picked up steam over the last 3 decades, but that scientific literature is now starting to emerge in a very different way.
In June 2012, a report co-authored by David Blask, Richard Stevens, Stephen Lockley, and George Brainerd on light at night was approved by the American Medical Association. Nighttime light can adversely affect health and can be linked to breast cancer and other medical conditions. After 25 years of working on the margins of this science, Richard Stevens feels validated, and he's optimistic for the future.
One of the appealing things about working on light and health is that this is an environmental exposure that we are in complete control of. The more we know about how light affects our biology, the better we can design these lights to give us enough to see, yet be better for our circadian system. So it's unlike a lot of other environmental issues where we kind of can't do anything about it. This one's really different.
While the term light pollution may sound extreme, it's clear that light in the wrong place and time can be a hazard. But we live in a 24/7 world and need to find sensible solutions. And in most cases, we can stop the potential harm to ourselves and others with a simple flick of a switch.